Hey there. Bet some of you thought you'd never see me starting a video like this again, but here I am. And I am in Hollywood. Not that Hollywood, the Portland Hollywood. To bring you a story, 60s story, that we pretty much know the details as to what happened, but there's still some elements that, if not mysterious, are still a little odd and make for a strange story. And the events of that story start just around the corner here. This crossing street we're approaching here is Cesar Chavez Boulevard, but in 1961 it was just good old 39th Avenue. And you turn the corner here and there's a big intersection, like 5 or 6 streets coming together up here at Sandy Boulevard. So this would have been 39th and Sandy back then. And back in those days, I'm not sure where exactly at this intersection, but one of these corners, there was a place called Carmen's Cactus Room. And a 29-year-old woman named Jean Rosaria Bussey, I'm assuming it's pronounced Bussey, I looked up the pronunciation, Bussey, and it came out as Bussey. So she would frequently visit the Cactus Room at this intersection right here. Enough that people recognized her as a regular. So on September 17th, 1961, Jean showed up at the Cactus Room here at around 11 p.m. And about a half hour later, a guy comes in, a guy who was also recognized as someone who frequently went there. He was named Richard Schwensen, and he was a 26-year-old college student. And again, people saw both Richard and Jean frequently at this location, but said up until this evening they'd never been seen corresponding with one another. But on this night, for whatever reason, they struck up a conversation and hung out there for a couple hours. They were there till around 2:45 a.m. And then, by all accounts, they left together. They'd both been drinking pretty heavily. I think Jean had at least 7 or 8 drinks, Richard closer to 10. And apparently she offered to give him a ride home, which, not the best idea, but that's what happened. And it's not fully clear exactly what happened in terms of who was actually driving when they left, because all we have to rely on is Richard Schwensen's story. And Richard's series of events were a little hazy. It was his initial description as to what happened. Oh, hello, kitty. Cat fight. Richard's original description of events actually made sense. It could have. He simply said that she gave him a ride home, or at least he drove to his place and then she took over. And he changed the story, but he changed it to one that not necessarily made less sense, but implicated him more as the possible suspect in this story, because you probably figured out by now, someone's gonna die in this story. But it inferred that likely Richard was the one driving when they left the Cactus Club, or Cactus Room, but it may be possible that Jean was driving, and at one point she was just too inebriated and she had to switch with him. It's unclear exactly which of those is an accurate depiction of events, but in his second telling of events, his revised story, Richard now says that they are, they're driving, but as they're approaching his home, which we're fairly close to now, we're about 18 blocks east of Carmen's and a couple blocks south, just for reference. He says that as they're approaching his place, Jean just passes out. Maybe too many drinks. It infers to me a little bit more that he was probably driving, because if she passed out driving, that would probably add an element to the story that would get told. So Richard says that he pushes her over if he's not driving, or he just keeps on driving and approaching his home. So, whoa, hello pooches. So Richard lived on this stretch of 57th between, what is it? Hasselo? Probably saying that wrong. I've always thought that was an interesting worded street, or named street. Between that and the next road down is Wasco. And he lived in one of these tiny houses here. There's a kind of light brown one that I think might have been the one. So again, we're only 22 blocks away from Carmen's. It probably didn't take that long to drive here, especially in 1961. But Richard says that after this woman passes out, doesn't seem like he's really that concerned. He's not checking up on her. And he just pulled up to his house back there and says he got out and changed his clothes real quickly, which is strange. Why are you going into your house and changing their clothes? Did you do something that some of the evidence is visible on your clothing? And why are you doing something so mundane as changing your clothes when there's an unconscious woman in your car that may be succumbing to alcohol poisoning? So he says he changes his clothes, gets back in the car, and continues driving with Jean just there, passed out. And they likely came from the vicinity of Halsey Street, the other side of Normandale Park here. Turned down 57th, stopped at the house, and then came and probably turned this way. I'm not sure how different this area looked. They may have been able to just drive right on through, because the Banfield freeway is right on the other side of all this, and that kind of cut through everything, so a lot of these streets don't go through anymore. So they may have back in 1961, and they may have just cut right through, but they definitely were ultimately traveling in a southern direction. Whew. I'm a little bit rusty at this, but I'm doing okay. And it is also like 9 in the morning. I got up pretty early. Now, another possible way they could have gone is straight down the street here and then turn this direction on 53rd. And the reason I suggest that is because our next stopping point is 53rd. And we know Richard drove Jean to this location because almost a week later, September 25th, this is where Jean Bussey's car was discovered by a passerby. And she was inside of it, deceased. She's been stuffed down onto the floorboards of the passenger side seat, likely intentionally to keep her hidden. I don't know what kind of vehicle it was. Perhaps putting the body in the trunk may have caught attention, but she had been stuffed on the floor. Her knees were on the ground and her head was just laying on the seat cushion like that. It was noted that her clothes were in some disarray and her underpants had been ripped, and there was some stainage on her garments that appeared to be blood. So It appeared she'd been sexually assaulted. There was trauma discovered, and not to be in depth, but there was trauma discovered in her anal and vaginal regions. And so she'd obviously been, it was very clear that she'd been sexually assaulted, but it was unclear exactly what killed her. It didn't seem like that would be all that it took to kill her off. But she would be removed from the vicinity of 53rd and Belmont, which actually, it wasn't in any of the newspapers I found exactly where her car was found. It's actually, I found it on her death certificate. It's listed on there, found in car at 53rd and Belmont. That's how I found out. But she was removed from there and taken to the morgue for an autopsy to figure out exactly what happened here. And this is where the seeds kind of start getting planted for the complications that would arise in this story. The coroner, Dr. W.L. Lehman, analyzed the body, did an initial analysis, and really couldn't figure out what the cause of death could have been. So he was uncertain. He kind of put it away, and then he came back 2 days later for a follow-up analysis. And it was during that analysis that he was able to at least draw some conclusion. And that conclusion was that in the process of being attacked, the trauma that Jean had experienced, it had actually been violent enough that it actually caused a tear and allowed air to enter her veins where there should only be blood. And so that air was allowed to enter, and that air shot right up into her heart. And the specific description that Dr. Lehman gave for the cause of death was an air embolism due to severe trauma of rectum, perineum, and vagina, and caused by this damage or tear to a vein. That was the conclusion that Dr. Lehman reached. And that was how Jean Bussey died. And so if you think that's an accurate depiction of what happened, imagine the ending that Jean Bussey experienced. I mean, the moment that tear happened, that air shoots into her heart, like, she's not going to survive much longer. To add to some of Richard's description that he gave of his time with her, he said that she, passed out all of a sudden, which may actually be an accurate take, especially if it's would have been after this assault. And he said that he checked on her again. He touched her arm a little bit later and noted that it was getting kind of cold, which should have been an indicator to him that this person is dead or dying. And he just left her. He just left her there. And Jean had been in her vehicle for about a week. It's kind of surprising that she was in there that long without anybody noticing her. Granted, she was more down on the floor, but somebody walking by on the sidewalk close by still probably could have seen something, but nobody noticed anything for a week. And she'd been reported missing by her husband. Her husband had been out of town. He left September 15th and came back September 18th. And the events of this story all happened during the early morning hours of the 18th. And Jean had also dropped off their child at her mother's place, probably just so she could have a night to herself. We all need that. And so she could go hang out at Carmen's and not have to worry about being at home. But she was going to come back the following morning and pick up her child. And obviously when she didn't show up the following morning, that was serious cause for concern. And about another week goes by where, the investigation is going. It's early on. Authorities have probably figured out that the last place Joan was seen alive was at Carmen's Cactus Room. And I think that while Richard was recognized as someone who'd been there before, I don't know if the people that worked there knew him by name. They just knew him as a regular, which makes sense. There's like 30 or 40 different people that are regulars where I work, and I know the names of like 3 of them. So authorities have probably found out that, yeah, Joan was in the company of a young man at the Cactus Club, and they were seen leaving together. But that's still kind of a rough starting point. Who was this man? Well, on October 3rd, so a little over a week after Joan is found dead, Richard is picked up and he's brought down to the police station. And why? To be in a lineup, because another woman by the name of Paula Joan Nesting was going to see him in a police lineup because someone had broken into her home in July and pistol whipped her so hard that she ended up with a skull fracture. So a pretty serious attack. And when Richard was brought in, she identified him in the police lineup as the person who broke into her home and attacked her. So they're holding him on this. This is a pretty serious crime. This is an attempted assault, an attempted murder, potentially. And as Richard is being held there and being, interrogated over this matter, he just starts spilling the beans about how he was with this woman who was found dead a little over a week earlier, that he was with her the night that she died. And that's when he started telling this story and then retelling it in a way that made him look substantially more guilty. So he put himself into a bit of a conundrum, and he would already get a 20-year sentence for the attack on Paula Nesting. But now there was this whole other scenario, and I don't understand why he changed the story the way he did. Perhaps knowing that she was found, and she was found unconscious the way she was. And I don't know, he may have not known that she was dead yet, because again, he was the one that began speaking. He was the one that began volunteering information. And he may have not even known at that time that she was killed. Her death was only reported in a few small articles deep in the city's newspapers. So it is possible that he maybe didn't know yet that she was dead, but he knew that he had just left her unconscious in a car, and then, I don't know, maybe he was just confessing all of his sins at once. I really don't know what was going through this guy's head. I mean, he was a scumbag. The fact that he had attacked another woman just a couple months before Jean's found dead. I mean, this guy was no angel, regardless of the circumstances. And come early December 1961, Richard Schwensen is officially charged with first-degree murder. So he definitely knew, at least by that point, that the woman he was with had died. And the reason he was charged with first-degree murder, because you might think, well, what happened here? Richard admitted that the two had sex with each other in 2 of the multiple confessions he gave, which he probably thought might explain the circumstances, since Jean had been sexually assaulted. But of course, he implied that it was consensual. But you might think, okay, even though he sexually assaulted her, it does not appear that there was any intent to kill. Like, he assaulted her and then left her there. He certainly was negligent in leaving her there. But how do you get a first-degree murder charge out of that? Well, the law at the time stipulated that if someone died as a result of an action that was felonious, that was a felony, and they died related to that, that qualified as homicide. And you see, because Dr. Lehman reached the conclusion that what Jean died of was brought on by the trauma she had received, and thus the act of the rape itself is what brought on the death. Therefore, in committing that, by law, Richard could be charged with first-degree murder. And this became a big deal as his trial came about, of which he would ultimately be found guilty of. I mean, it was hard under the circumstances of the evidence to argue otherwise. I mean, the guy immediately admitted he'd been with her, and he admitted that, you know, he'd been in the car with her. He even admitted that he pulled her over and just left her at the side of the road. The issue was the fact that Jean was in her car for a week, and it would be more than a week before she would first be analyzed by Dr. Lehman. And he, you know, drew the conclusion that carried the trial, which was that this embolism that Jean had was brought on by the assault. That was specifically what caused it. Well, several other doctors, well versed in the same field as Dr. Lehman, came forward and said, after like 8 days before analyzing somebody's dead body, you can't establish the cause of an air embolism, to at least to an absolute certainty. So it was felt that Dr. Lehman was perhaps a little overzealous in his claims. And it is imperative to note that the conclusions that Dr. Lehman reached about the air embolism, that was a theory, and it was noted as such. This was the conclusion he reached, but it wasn't so much that there was all the medical evidence to prove that. It was more that, based on the analysis, this is the most logical thing to have happened. So they didn't prove that this is what happened. So that's an obvious issue, especially when you're talking about putting someone away for life, specifically charging them for murder, and all of those factors come together. And in mentioning that, I just want to mention an alternative possible theory. Now, I don't have enough evidence. I'm not a medical professional. I cannot prove that this is what happened, but I'm almost wondering if Jean Bussey actually died of alcohol poisoning. She had something in the realm of 7-8 drinks. We don't know how strong those drinks are, but according to pretty much anywhere you look, medically speaking, if you're having drinks that are in excess of like 60 proof alcohol, like 30%, your chances of both losing consciousness as well as having your life threatened increase. And while there's possible symptoms of alcohol poisoning that Jean may or may not have shown that we don't know about, there's certain ones that I feel like if she did experience them, we would have heard about it, such as, you know, vomiting, things like that, but possibly not. And obviously, if somebody is suffering from alcohol poisoning, they're not necessarily going to have every symptom that you can possibly have. But in particular, of note, I found it interesting that 3 symptoms of alcohol poisoning that exist are difficulty remaining consciousness, clammy skin, and a body temperature drop, sometimes a drastic body temperature drop. And we know that Jean passed out, just lost consciousness in the car, and we also have Robert Swenson saying that when he touched her arm, it was getting cold. Now, of course, that could have just been, you know, she was dying or dead already, but the fact that she felt cold to the touch could be an indication of a body temperature drop and could suggest clammy skin. So Jean was experiencing at least some symptoms that could have been due to alcohol poisoning, and I don't know how often she drank. I don't know what her tolerance level was, but I do know she had several drinks. Now, this was over a period of about 3.5 hours, so if she was separating the drinks out, maybe this wouldn't be a likelihood. We don't know how much she was drinking at any given time, so there's a lot of details we don't know that make it hard to argue definitively that it could have been alcohol poisoning. But with the official conclusion reached not having definitive evidence in and of itself, I honestly think the potential that she died of alcohol poisoning is more likely than the conclusion that Dr. Lehman reached, because at least we actually have some valid symptoms of it. It doesn't dismiss Robert Schwenson's behavior in any way, shape, or form. But it's very possible that she could have been succumbing to alcohol poisoning in that time, and when she needed to be taken to a hospital and probably had her stomach pumped, among other things, to try to save someone in that scenario, she was left unconscious in her car, and I can only presume never woke up. And Richard's defense also tried to, over the course of things, argue that it couldn't even be proof that this was a rape. Which that was how they determined the cause of death. So if you can't prove the felony, how do you prove the first-degree charge? I'd say the damage found on Jean's body would provide pretty solid rebuttal evidence to that claim, but that was another argument that they made. But either way, first February of 1962, he's given his 20-year sentence for his other assault. And then June 1962, he's convicted for murdering Jean Bussey. And the jury were obviously thoroughly convinced of his guilt. They gave him a conviction and asked for no leniency, which meant a guaranteed death row sentence awaiting a trip to the gas chamber. So it seemed like things were all done with Richard. However, in September 1963, a little over a year after Richard Swenson has gone away to prison, his attorney, Charles Elliott, files paperwork to have the case taken to the Oregon Supreme Court for reversal. Now, at this point, no first-degree murder conviction had ever been overturned in the state of Oregon. However, Richard's conviction would be. And strangely enough, it wasn't because of the claims of other doctors who said, it would have been impossible for Dr. Lehman to reach the conclusions he did based on how long after death he analyzed Jean. It wasn't because of that. It was actually because a portion of Richard's confession was allowed to be used at trial, and it shouldn't have been. So it was deemed an error, and that granted him a new trial. So Richard's conviction is overturned by the Supreme Court in May of 1964. And even had that not happened, only a few months later in November, voters in Oregon voted to overturn the death penalty. So even by November, Richard would have at least known that he wasn't going to the gas chamber, at least anytime soon. And I'm sure the case was a little bit of an embarrassment. And when it's a case like this where, you pretty much know what happened, but there's some doubt, sometimes they just let it go. And that's what happened here. Instead of Richard Swenson getting a new trial, the charges of murder were dropped, and then after that, the charges of rape against him were dropped. He still had that 20-year sentence for his prior attack, but they just dismissed pretty much the whole Jean Bussey case. And this guy, again, he was still in prison, but in terms of serving time for your crime, he only served wasn't even, let's see, he was released in early 64. Yeah, it was it was 2.5 years. Obviously, by that point, it was just one of those cases where there was enough doubt to people. Was it an assault, or was this guy just kind of rough? I think that's a stupid question. I think it's pretty clear that this guy assaulted her, and he practically admitted as much without admitting it. The guy, completely uncoerced, gave his account of events, which included sexual encounter with this woman and literally abandoning her in her car where it was later found. And again, one of the key element that got the case reversed was portions of the confession. Now, maybe those portions of that confession, it was deemed wouldn't have been allowed in future trials, and maybe without that, it would have made the case much more difficult to win, and that's why they excused it. And excuse you. And that's the way the law works sometimes. But objectively, this guy maybe didn't intend on killing Jean Bussey, but he was a rapist. All right, so he doesn't get a pass from me. And he had attacked another woman in her home just a couple months earlier, which indicates to me serial offender tendencies. And Schwensen, he manages to get paroled out of prison after about 10 years. Early 1970s, he goes into a program at the University of Oregon. Only a couple of months after he gets paroled, he's busted trying to rob a dry cleaning establishment. So then he gets another 5-year sentence. So, guy just liked screwing up. And maybe if he was more taken to task for some of his other foolishness, recklessness, maybe he would have been off the streets. Maybe he would have come out a different person, but I doubt it. And I don't know how much longer he was in prison, or if he got mixed up in any other crimes later on. It wouldn't surprise me. But what I do know is he passed away on June 14th, 1987 at the age of 52. And that was it for him. But Jean Bussey only got to live to be 29. And it's one of those frustrating stories that's also very intriguing. You have this story that has an element of mystery to it when it really shouldn't. And there's maybe a little bit of crookedness. I wouldn't necessarily say corruption, but it does make my eyebrows raise when I see that, this woman's found dead. They don't really know initially what happened, and this coroner can't seem to figure out what it is, and then he comes back 2 days later, and all of a sudden he's got this resolution, a resolution that was called into question by several other people that work in the same field as him. So things like that make me wonder, but we still know this guy was violent. We know this guy was a rapist. I don't think, because they couldn't immediately find a cause to indicate murder or an intent to murder, you still can only say that Richard is guilty of that rape. But again, he was a reoccurring offender. This was a guy that clearly had a thing for attacking women, and guys like that don't change. So it's a very frustrating thing. He did go to prison. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if he was paroled for Jean's case had it not been overturned because of the issues that I've discussed. And eventually someone would have come along and said, okay, maybe he's a rapist, but he didn't intend to murder her, or at least we can't prove that, and we have him sitting in prison on a murder charge. It's just a very nasty situation. And that is the dark and tragic story of the death of Jean Rosaria Bussey back in 1961. A story where, you know, did she get some justice? I don't know. Did she get enough justice? I don't think so. But I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is the first time in many, many, many months that I've gone out and vlogged like this. So I may be a little rusty. I'm getting back into the groove, but here I am, and I'm actually going to be doing another video out here like this today, so you can look forward to both of these. Or I guess that one, because by this point you've already finished this video. But again, thank you so much, my longtime followers and subscribers. If you're new here, thank you for stopping by. Remember to like, share, subscribe. I have a Patreon as well. I'm still trying to make a little bit more money before I get married, which is going to date this video hardcore. I'm getting married in about a month. So, exciting things up ahead. But all that said, again, one more time, thank you so much for stopping by. And this has been Steve, the Amateur Historian.